Joe Schoen of the New York Football Giants make the first big deal ahead of Tuesday's trade deadline, sending Leonard Williams to the Seattle Seahawks in exchange for a 2024 second-round pick and 2025 fifth-round pick. We break down the move, the money, and what it could mean as the Giants will continue to explore trade options ahead of the deadline tomorrow. Yes, my friends. OGP, the One Giant podcast, with a bit of breaking news reported by Ian Rappaport first over on Twitter, also followed up by some local guys like Dan Duggan, also by Paul Dottino as well, providing some contextual information around the Leonard Williams trade. If you were in with us on YouTube this morning for our episode or on the podcast feed, you heard Andy and I spend a little bit of time, not a lot of time, talking about the disappointment of that loss yesterday to the New York Jets, but then ultimately moving into what mattered most. What are the Giants going to do? Are they going to be willing to move on from players? Obviously, Leonard Williams was on that list. Adoree Jackson was on that list. We've talked about Saquon Barkley. We know that that's not going to happen, or has to be as unlikely as humanly possible, barring an impressive offer from a trade from another candidate, willing to give big capital to get what would essentially be on paper a rental of Saquon Barkley. We know Xavier McKinney could be another guy that could be inside of those discussions. But at the highest possible level, having Leonard Williams off of this roster, having the voidable year next year, we'll go through the details around what the Giants got back, around what they're going to have to take on responsibility financially for, and what it'll mean for them beyond this season. But when you break it down, these are guys that had to be moved. And we can debate about whether or not, going back to yesterday, what if the Giants had won that game? What if the Giants had won that game and they're sitting here instead of 2-6, they're 3-5? And we know that Daniel Jones, while being ruled out on Friday, was cleared for contact early on Sunday, I think it was. But by the NFL rules, he wasn't going to be able to participate in that game. So he could be back this week. Did that loss dictate terms for the Giants and Joe Schoen about what they wanted to do, about what they were willing to do at the deadline? We can say in theory that a win there would have changed the perception, but I don't think so. I think that coming out of these last few weeks, Daniel Jones or not, you look at the state of the offensive line, you look at some of the injuries that you've sustained, and then you have Tyrod Taylor going down as well, who was released from the hospital. Paul Dottino reporting that just a few minutes ago over on Twitter, saying that he's back at the facility now. But you have all these question marks, right? So you come out of these last few weeks, I think, even though the defense has played tremendous, even though you've been in these games and they've been close, there's still a long way to go. So would you have, having won that game yesterday, said, let's push it one more week. Let's go take on the Raiders with Daniel Jones. And then what if you lose? You're right back in this same spot. The season is over, and you did not take advantage ahead of the deadline of being able to move some assets. That being the case, let's run it down real quick here after we go ahead and just let the people know that we're over here breaking down the Leonard Williams trade for the New York Football Giants. And then we'll go ahead and dive in on the details. And you guys, if you're in on the chat on YouTube, obviously feel free, give your reactions. We're going to get into a little bit of other players that we'd like to see moved here potentially, and then what it means on the back end for the Giants over the remainder of this season across that defensive front. So we realize that we cannot talk and type that effectively ourselves over on Twitter, and we get this one out the door and we dive in on what is the discussion around one Leonard Williams. So effectively, the Giants receive a 2024 second-round pick and a 2025 fifth-round pick from the Seattle Seahawks. We'll talk about where Seattle stands right now in the pecking order going into the draft, how this can obviously help them improve and potentially win competitive games and get into the playoffs and go on a deep run. But getting that second-round pick is critical. And congratulations to Allen with the Seahawks, man. You got a heck of a player here, right? No one dismisses how good Leonard Williams is as a player and what he can be as a contributor. But a second and fifth round pick, and these were all noted from Paul Dottino, from Ian Rappaport, and from Dan Duggan. So we're combining the information that we pulled as this deal broke about 15, 20, half hour ago or so. Williams has a voidable 2024 season. So the Giants are automatically going to go ahead and give themselves some additional cap flexibility going into next season. That matters because the Giants already had cap room ready to use. So there's going to be free agents that this team is going to target and wants to improve the roster on both sides of the ball. You make sure you get there. Even if it was a voidable year, you just guarantee that that's going to be taken care of. In addition, the Seahawks came in with $5.8 million in cap space. So Leonard Williams had about half of his contract remaining of the $18 million. So the Giants are going to have to eat some of that, probably indicative of why they end up getting the second round pick from the Seattle Seahawks, because you're going to go ahead and make up that margin there to whatever degree, whether it's a full, $3.2 million, is it a little more, a little less, whatever the case may be. If the Seahawks say we also need to keep a little bit extra flexibility in case we want to make an extra move on the back of this Leonard Williams pickup. So the Giants will have to eat something there. But again, for a player that was not going to be a part of the long-term future of this team and then had real money on the books, you make the smart choice, you make the active choice, and get him out the door here sooner. And I will note, as we also think about the fact that Leonard Williams is a player that you could have strung this out all the way until the deadline tomorrow. I would assume that making a move like this quickly on the front end means that there's a secondary move coming here. And I would assume that it's going to be a guy probably like Adoree Jackson. And it's unfortunate because even though Adoree Jackson has struggled a little bit this season, obviously has not played up to the standard that we've become accustomed to as Giants fans or over the course of his career, even going back to Tennessee. But you shuffle him around. Deonte Banks clearly has come out, right? Tay Banks is ready to be that number one for us. He's taken on those number one matchups. He traveled with Garrett Wilson on Sunday, went to Wink and said he wanted that matchup and played effectively against him. So you have your new number one corner. You're playing him at slot a little bit. We didn't even really get into the fact that Cordell Flott also had, I think, arguably his best game as a Giant yesterday as well. So you have the young players. Those guys are ready to step into larger roles over the back half of this season, and you want to see them continue to develop. So Adoree Jackson is the next guy that I think you need to take a look at here when we speculate around where this could go. Checking in over on the live conversation, I'm going to say heck, not that double hockey sticks is an overly bad word. We try to keep it clean, though. I will too, by the way, Notorious Mo. This is one of those things. Over the life of Leonard Williams' contract and his time with the New York Football Giants, and we can actually punch this up right here. When we talk about Leonard Williams as a New York Giant, one of the things early in his career that Andy and I used to defend every single week over on the podcast was this idea that, Leonard Williams doesn't get sacks, but pressures matter, right? That still influences the way an offense has to try to run their system. Being able to shut down the running game still matters. Being an occupier of 1 and 2 bodies across the front that affords other players to go make plays for themselves and go get those sack categories. Leonard Williams, over the course of his career for the New York Football Giants, gave us effectively 4+ seasons. The 5th season will not come to full fruition. He played in only 8 games. I'm sorry, I should say 4. It'll be 4 total seasons because he came over midway through that 2019 season when Gettleman traded for him from the Jets, ironically, who they played yesterday. So he came in, though, and over the remainder of that 2019 season, he provided you with only a half a sack, but 13 assists, 13 solo tackles, and gave you 1 forced fumble. He then dialed it up the following year with 11.5 sacks in his first full season with the Giants. Gave you 6.5 the year after with 47 assists. And then last year, 19 assists, 2.5 sacks, 1 forced fumble, and a recovery to go along with it. Did a lot of good work for this Giants front in conjunction with the Dexter Lawrence. Then you get Azeez Ojulari coming in over the last couple of years. Then you get a Kayvon Thibodeau. One of the fallout pieces here is obviously going to be, how does this defensive front play in the absence of Leonard Williams? The positive that we can point to from a New York Giants standpoint is you did go out. Remember, go back to the offseason. Joe Schoen said there were holes last year in the roster that we wanted to go out. We wanted to get more depth. We wanted to make sure, especially across the front, that we had some of those pieces. Well, remember, some of those pieces are there now. A'Shawn Robinson is now a part of that. Now, you're without already Azeez Ojulari for the remainder of this season, so it's not like new holes haven't been brought up here. But you have A'Shawn Robinson, you have Dexter Lawrence, you have Kayvon Thibodeau, as we know. Bobby Okereke has been anchoring the linebacker core these last few weeks. Micah McFadden has played significantly better. So you look across that front now, and even Nunez Roche was playing yesterday and had some nice moments for himself as well. it doesn't really matter ultimately. These guys just got to step up. And remember, they had the draft pick in Jordan Riley, who flashed at times throughout this season too. Later round draft pick, but certainly looked like a positive for the New York Football Giants. So you have some players that are going to step up and play. But make no mistake about it, this is the acknowledgement that this season is not going to be salvageable. And we're willing to take away from what has been our best unit over the last 3-4 weeks of the season, the defensive side of the ball. So be it, right? You cannot go ahead and hold on to these assets and mitigate what was only 6 picks in next year's draft, by the way. The Giants did not have a lot of capital. So now you pick up a 7th pick next year in the second round, and then you also go ahead and get a 5th one as well. Now, as we roll through here, we'll continue to reiterate the deal that was done and then talk to you guys, obviously, in the live chat where we appreciate you coming in and joining us on OGP. Giants send Leonard Williams over to the Seattle Seahawks in exchange for a 2024 second-round pick, a 2025 fifth-round pick, and also some financial considerations are assumed to be a part of this process to make sure that the money was going to work for the Seattle Seahawks, who only had about $5.8 million in cap room coming into the day. So we'll continue to look here as well. If anything else comes up over on Twitter, we'll update it as we move, and we'll be back in tomorrow breaking it down a little bit more as well. Over in the live chat, I will acknowledge, so I'm already seeing here there was a note about Aziz. Well, he's on IR, so you're not going to worry about trading him. And I don't think with his age, even though the injuries, you'll try to get him back on track next year. And then you'll explore what the opportunities are with a player like that if it doesn't look like things are going to be going in the right direction. The overall as well here. Let's see. We'll throw up a couple of comments here. We got Tommy getting in, frequent flyer. Makes sense. Giants are secretly tanking. No wonder the play calling has been trash at the last minute. Yeah, this goes back to one of the only 2 wins for the New York Football Giants against the Arizona Cardinals. People speculated that the Arizona Cardinals were operating underneath the same type of system, right? Play really well for the first half, show that you can compete, and hey, they would go win this game. And then, hey, everybody, dial it back a little bit here. Let's not get out ahead of ourselves. And speaking of which, in the hierarchy, we mentioned this in our episode earlier today. The Giants got themselves into the 4th overall pick after yesterday's loss. They're now ahead of New England, who they will play head-to-head later this season. They're now ahead of Green Bay, who they will play head-to-head later this season. The Rams, even at 3-5, head-to-head later this season. So when that happens, this is where, again, I go back to the loss is what gets you to this spot. But even if they had won that game and still found themselves in this type of advantageous position, you have to look at what an opportunity you're going to potentially have along with the Carolina Panthers. Even though their pick is going to Chicago, that's why they can afford to go win games. They got their first win of the season. Maybe they sneak out and get a second win along the way here. Depending on how things unfold, the Giants could still move up this board another spot or maybe 2 over the back half of this season. The Seattle Seahawks, on the other hand, as we scan our way through talking about where all these teams land, Seattle at the moment is going to be in the conference championship category here because they're 5-2. That's where they get slotted here, the 29th overall pick. So you're talking about a back-end second-round pick, but that's right now at 5-2. If we go in and look inside this division on where that team currently stands, it's why Seattle wants to go make a move to improve this roster, because they can see themselves being able to win this division. The San Francisco 49ers have had their struggles of late. They have not been able to play the dominant football from a few weeks ago where everyone said, well, obviously the 49ers are the best team in the league. Well, injuries happen. And before you know it, the Seattle Seahawks now, not the San Francisco 49ers, lead the division. The beautiful part about this for the Giants is you make this deal on the premise, hey, it's going to be a back-end second-round pick until the Seattle Seahawks play out the rest of their season. I don't know how it's going to go. They have coming up here as we work our way through it, the Ravens, followed by the Commanders, followed by the Rams. All very winnable games for this team. Then the head-to-head with the 49ers, then on the road against the Cowboys, and then on the road against the 49ers. The first meeting at the back end of November 23rd being at home against the 49ers. Those 3 games right there. If they go 0-2 against the 49ers and tumble out of this pick, in theory, it's as low in value as it's ever going to be for the Giants right now, and is only going to increase over the back end of this season, let alone once you get to the playoffs and whatever those results end up being. So, losing Leonard Williams as a player and an individual, and I'll tie this into my perspective when we've talked about Saquon Barkley and what should or shouldn't be done, or how how the Giants should have approached things. It's not about the individual as a player on the field or as a personality in the locker room. All these guys are great. And we heard Leonard Williams say, listen, some systems benefit certain players and certain positions more than others. This system with Wink is about other guys feasting. It's not about me getting the sacks, and that's okay. You could take it either way, maybe a little bit of, feeling like you don't get to be a part of that, but ultimately always a professional, always showed up and came to play, right? Always wanted to be out there helping to contribute. And as we round this back out here, this comes care of Paul Dottino, who is referencing Albert Breer. New Seahawks defensive lineman Leonard Williams has $10 million due for the rest of 2023. Seattle will only be responsible for the prorated veteran minimum, with the Giants converting the rest to a signing bonus and picking that up pre-trade, sources say. So that's how you end up with this second round pick. The Giants convert it. They eat a little more of the cash, and then it gets sent over to Seattle on the prorated number. And that's just Paul Dottino clarifying we'll pick up most of Williams' salary. So instead of cap savings plus a pick, it's really only picks. But again, when you have that second round pick from the Seattle Seahawks, and they're currently sitting at the top of their division, it's only going to sweeten here potentially over the remainder of this year. So I like the risk reward of this and getting off a player again that you simply were not going to be bringing back around. Reminder too, after the Philadelphia Eagles at 7-1, you have the Cowboys at 5-2, but they're behind in the division. The Detroit Lions leading 5-2 their division, and then it's 4-4 teams. So Seattle, Atlanta, New Orleans, depending on if Seattle falls out of the top of the division at some point, you can still tumble behind a couple of these teams. Minnesota, with everything that's gone on, the injury to Kirk Cousins, already without Jefferson as well, obviously that's going to look different for them. There's still a few teams, though. There are still a few teams that are going to be fighting for pecking order when it comes to the wild card. So I reiterate that losing Leonard Williams or trading away Leonard Williams is not only good for business in the long term, but in the short term can end up being just as valuable to them. Let's go ahead and take a look here. Some of the comments, anybody getting in on the conversation, you can shout out at One Giant Podcast if you want to, if it's something specific that you want to get up, or we'll just highlight the nature of the beast, which Tyrod Taylor's cousin, I believe. It's a business. You can't go at it like they're family. They're employees of a business. Yeah, listen, this is true across any sport, but the same way that Saquon Barkley wanted to get paid this offseason and wanted a multi-year deal. You respect the player on the field, you respect the player in the locker room, and it comes down to money. And when these guys go to free agency, ultimately, it's not like sometimes, hey, if you want to match the offer, I'll come back and play for you. But if I can go get more money elsewhere, I'm going to. That's the nature of it. And that's okay. It doesn't need to be animosity around it, but it is just the reality of what this is. The other thing that I think is really interesting, as Tommy says, they're going to trade Jones to the Vikings. That would certainly be an impressive move by the New York Football Giants. Get him healthy and then send him off. That while there's nothing to indicate that's what's going on, that's an interesting conversation. I think if Daniel Jones had played this year without the injury, and we talked about this with Tyrod Taylor, what if Tyrod Taylor was healthy and played some decent games? I think the Vikings would have been a team that would have said, hey, we might take a look at a player like that if we need to stem the tide here, or any team that's had some issues around injuries at the QB position. If Daniel Jones was playing decent ball, it can't be great, because then the Giants would be perfectly content with him. But if he was healthy and playing decent ball, it would have been interesting to see if teams came knocking around this player, even at that massive number. Between the contract and I think the general perception right now, I don't think it's very likely, but would have been an interesting narrative to follow. Garcia Arts, I'm going to miss him. He's a great defensive player, but we need a franchise QB. It's no question we do, and an O-line to provide protection. Yeah, this is the both end of it. You lose a great defensive player, a guy that's been a contributor, and now you're going to have to go ahead and wait and see, right? What comes next for the New York Football Giants? I mentioned Adoree Jackson as being another key piece. It's going to weaken the defensive side of the football. The other part of this is, as I also said, the Giants only had those 6 picks in next year's draft. They now pick up a 7th. Adoree Jackson's not going to get you a second round pick. Like we can all be clear about that. But if I can get a 4th or 5th round pick for Adoree Jackson, the other benefit of not just, well, are you going to convert that pick into player X that automatically replaces production? No. But I can go ahead and say, well, I'm picking at the top end of the 4th round. And I also have this mid to back end 5th round pick that I got in 2025 from the Seattle trade. I can put those together. Maybe I can sneak into the 3rd round and get a targeted player that I like, right? We saw the Giants do this last year when they wanted Jalen Hyatt, targeted and moved up the board. So that matters here. You can take these pieces and functionally get up and target specific players that you know you're going to need to ultimately go with what the Giants are going to need to do, and that's add through free agency. We can take a look here briefly at where the Giants stand from a cap room perspective going into next year, and we'll see where those numbers sit next season. I doubt that if Over the Cap or Spot Track has updated this yet. They still have Leonard Williams on the books, but if we turned it over to the following season, we'll now know you don't have to worry about this voidable year that you were probably going to get rid of anyway. Like we appreciated that. So going into this next upcoming offseason, the Giants will have 53 million, a little north of that, going into next year. So they have opportunities, right? And this actually does. So credit to Over the Cap here. The prorated bonus ends up being 4.96 million. So that's what the Giants are probably something around that number. They went ahead and ate and also got themselves back that pick. We'll clarify these numbers on tomorrow's show. But there you go. You're going to walk into next year with over $50 million in cap room. And one of the other things that I looked up when we were talking about this year, remember, dead cap wise, the Giants had other problems that they were dealing with in terms of the dead cap number as well, because they still have Kenny Golladay sitting on the books here. That dead cap number was like, I think it's north of 13, 14 million, something in that range, I believe. So you still had this other issues that you're dealing with. So if you're Joe Schoen, you're trying to be as proactive and manage what this is going to look like for your team, not just this offseason, not just in next year's draft, but also another year down the line. So Leonard Williams sent to the Seattle Seahawks in exchange for a 2024 second-round pick, a 2025 fifth-round pick. The bulk of the remaining $10 million was converted to a bonus that the New York Giants will eat on their end, avoiding sending too much money onto the books for the Seattle Seahawks. And as I mentioned, maybe still providing them with some flexibility around what they want to do going forward here before the deadline tomorrow, right? If you're Seattle, there could be another move that you can try to make to continue to improve this team now that you're leading the division. Maybe you want to find a way to make that a chase. And then when you get to those head-to-heads, the dream here is you get to those head-to-heads, you even split them and keep yourself ahead of the 49ers in those matchups as well. We'll take one more scan around here, but ultimately as the Giants move off of one Leonard Williams, the next question will become, do they move off of Adoree Jackson? Do they move off of, now, Leonard Williams, older player, not a part of the future. Adoree Jackson, older player, expiring contract, not a part of the future either. And also just a reminder here, this from Dan Duggan updated this as well. I said at the top, Tyrod Taylor was discharged from the hospital and returned to the team facility. That was about a half hour ago. So he's back out in theory. We'll see what the news comes in terms of his health. It was a rib injury that he had to leave the game with and ultimately go get checked out at the hospital. So now the other question for me is a guy like Xavier McKinney. We want to leave off, Saquon Barkley. We've heard them say we're not moving Saquon. It's not going to be a part of what we do this season. That's fine. I also told you earlier today, though, like it's hard for me to sit here and say we're not going to move on from Saquon Barkley. And without him yesterday, who knows what kind of disaster we've been looking at. But in not moving Saquon and then running him 30 plus times a game for the remainder of the season, why put the mileage on him? Now, the Giants can manage their way through this if they think they're going to tag him again in this offseason, if they think they're going to try to get another contract done with him. Okay. But I'll be very fascinated to see how they manage their way through the rest of this season if you keep Saquon. Because injury risks, short and long term, are going to be on the table. Just more wear and tear on a running back is going to be on the table. And you've now communicated that this season is over. We're ready to sell things now. So what are you doing with that player? Understanding that I'm a fan of him. He's great on the field. He's great in the locker room, all that stuff. Xavier McKinney is another guy in this boat. Are you paying Xavier McKinney? You picked up Pinnock off the practice squad for the Jets. He's played the part. You still have a guy like Dane Belton, who you've been trying to develop. Hasn't necessarily come to fruition the way we would have hoped, but not unlike Cordell Flott, not unlike Micah McFadden, right? These guys, they come along, and all of a sudden you see a big burst forward for them over a few weeks. So are you going to dedicate $11, $12 million a year to Xavier McKinney? If not, field the offers. field the offers on a player like this because he's young. And there could be a team out there that looks and says, oh, well, we don't have anybody on the back end of our defense. And not only can he help us in the short term this year, but then going into the future of the next 3, 4, 5 years, the life of a new contract, he can be a player that really helps move the needle for us. We know that he's underperformed and it has not been as consistent as we would have liked to see from him as a guy taken at the top of the second round. But nevertheless, if you can convert him into a pick, especially in next year's draft, and get yourself to 8 and 9 picks in next year's draft, then I think the Giants would be foolhardy not to field those calls. This Leonard Williams trade at least indicates that they are willing to answer them. Garcia Arts backing on it with, do you think we need a new kicker? I don't think we do. Gano hasn't made any mistakes, but yesterday he fell apart with his injury. Yeah, it's just injury. I mean, they just signed him the extension. I'm in a private chat with some guys related to the Locked On Nets podcast who are also Giants fans. So we talked about this, I think, a couple of weeks ago when I had said this season's over, the Giants should be trading players. I mentioned that Gano should be a guy that you trade. Now, they just signed him the 3-year, $16.5 million extension that goes through 2027. But why wouldn't you think about trading a 36-year-old? Now, the injury is the problem here. At 36 years old, which I didn't realize that Gano was that old, honestly. Like, that's a steep price. You're going to pay him until he's 36. You're paying him through 2026 when he's 39 years old. That cannot be the agenda that the New York Football Giants are running with. Unfortunately, because of the injury, that may hurt him. I wonder if there's a world where they end up, looking at shutting him down for this year as well. And you have to go get somebody just to fill in the gap. But this is the other point that I'll make. When we talk about the Giants now and what it means going forward, with Ishmael Bull saying, and the Giants fire sale begins, wasted cash for over a decade. Yeah, listen, they've made a lot of mistakes, right? But I always keep coming back to the core of this with Joe Schoen, and we debated these things. And I'll remind you here too. Is it high? Yes. It's a very low cost for the Seattle Seahawks. So the Giants eating the money is why you get the increased draft capital. And from Seattle's standpoint, if you think it's going in that direction, that you're going to be competitive, you could win the division, you could have a deep playoff run, you look at it as, well, we're almost giving you a borderline 3rd-round pick. The Giants, you're thinking it can be better and more impressive. And also the 5th-round pick going into the next season as well. But the Giants, go back to Joe Schoen. We had talked about how when he came in, he was almost too transparent with the idea of, hey, a lot of work to do, a lot of things that need to happen here for this team to get better, but we're going to continue to work at it. In the first offseason before the first draft, he said a lot of holes to fill. And then the next one, it was, still a lot of holes to fill. And when they gave the contract to Daniel Jones, Andy and I, we right there, was, okay, $40 million, big number, sure, 2-year out. Not a firm commitment. It's a, hey, there's not maybe better options for us. We'll stick with you for now. You can make the case they shouldn't have, but it's not an overcommitment. Even trading for Darren Waller, who now has the injury, which is unfortunate because I think the Giants should look at him as a tradable piece here before the deadline as well, but the health is probably going to prevent that from happening. Even in that trade, though, you gave up some draft capital, yes, but it's also a contract that you can get out of after next season. So all these things have these little built-in outs around them. Upping Andrew Thomas, of course, he's a cornerstone piece. Need him to be healthy. Upping Dexter Lawrence actually looked like a little bit of a friendly contract to stay with the Giants. Awesome. Like, these are the guys that you want to stick around here. He's identified the core players. Now, and even a player in the relative short term, but Bobby Okereke, you need to fix the linebacker and anchor of this team. You did that. So you've seen the moves and where Joe Schoen has made commitments, but all the tea leaves suggested that Joe Schoen is going to take his time fixing this team. The difficult part has been, and what we didn't anticipate, was some of the questions that are now being asked about the coaching staff. Wink Martindale went through it early. He's leveled things off very well and exceeded on the defensive side. But the offensive side has certainly struggled. We know with the injuries. But the questions about Bobby Johnson, the questions about Mike Kafka, then even out of yesterday, a lot of fans questioning Brian Dable and the way that he approached some of the decisions in that game, right? So these are some of the other things with the way this season has gone that has maybe made it a little bit bumpier of a road than Joe Schoen and the Giants would have liked. And yet, I think this is the way that you had to go here ahead of the deadline. James Watson saying, great trade. It's going to be a high 2nd-round pick. Seattle has 2 third-round picks. Yeah, well, and again, it'll depend on how they finish out, but there's nothing about this that doesn't make sense to take that risk. As we remind everybody, right now, Seattle sits in 29th position here on Tankathon, but has big games coming up, 2 still against division rival competing for the division in the San Francisco 49ers. The Giants at 4th position in the draft have all the opportunity in the world here to avoid any more wins. And actually, we can even take a look here. Let's get a little peek at the 3 teams ahead of us here. Don't know how the Giants are going to rise, but certainly you want to keep yourself in a top 5 situation. We'll highlight Ishmael here again. I told many for so many seasons, I'm going to say, all y'all wanted Barkley and DJ, wide receivers, etc. We don't have no offensive line. I don't know LOS. Clarify what you mean by that. I'm sure I'm just forgetting an acronym here. Nor a D line. Shaking. I know what SMFH is already. Need someone competent to build us. Yeah, this is the other part of it too, and this is why I've always been a pro trading Saquon Barkley. Not about the player, just about where the team is. And this is actually why when we went back and talked about it, if you had to make a choice between Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley, I said at the time, let's go ahead. Line of scrimmage. I could not get there, but I got there in the end. I said at the time, I'll keep you want to give Saquon Barkley a contract. I disagree with overpaying running backs, but he's the locker room guy. He's been a stand-up guy for the team. Keep him. Have him there for your rookie quarterback that you go get, or with the bridge quarterback that you're going to bring in, and don't pay Daniel Jones. Instead, they went ahead and gave Daniel Jones the contract. There's a good chance they still keep Saquon beyond this season, and it's going to be interesting to see how that unfolds. For the Giants' remaining schedule, let's do the list here. The Giants' remaining schedule in terms of whether or not we think they're going to accidentally walk themselves into a win. The Raiders game, you're going to have Garoppolo's back there and under center for them. Whether or not they're a good team, the Giants can't look at anybody and say, well, any of these are winnable games. The Cowboys game is going to be a loss. The Commanders are still going to have things to play for here, right? In spite of the fact of being 3-5. So they may be trying to scrape by. Could actually be a battle of ineptitude at that point in that game. And those are really the 3 big ones. The Commanders, the Patriots, the Packers have struggled mightily. So getting through, now that we're in tank mode, getting through the Commanders, Patriots, Packers, and Saints games without accidentally walking into wins is going to be critical. Because you're talking about the Eagles, they could be either competing for the number 1 seed, maybe they've locked up the number 1 seed, and then even the LA Rams right now, where are they going to be by the end of this year? They're a 3-5 team at the moment. So there is a lot of losing football in terms of who else is on their schedule that the Giants are going to have to be a little bit careful about to avoid accidentally finding themselves dropping down in terms of top 10. We'll go over to why that's not like the end of the world if they happen to win a game here, but obviously the goal needs to be to get as low as possible. The Carolina Panthers, who got their first win, and that matters because you have your rookie quarterback, because your pick is going to the Chicago Bears. They beat the Houston Texans 15-13. Now they have the Bears. That's good news because it's 1-1. No matter what happens, the Giants are either going to maybe have a better opportunity. You kind of want Carolina to win that, right? Get them their second win and keep Chicago at 2 wins. That's a good line there for the New York Football Giants. And then even beyond that, they're going to have the Titans, who had Will Levis just absolutely explode this past game. They're still going to be trying to compete, you would think. The Bucs are battling for it. The Saints, the Falcons, Packers, Jaguars, and then Bucs again to close out the year. I don't know if the Panthers have another 1 or 2 wins in them, but there's some opportunity there. And at a minimum, the divisional games matter, right? Like, even though we think about, obviously, Carolina is a long ways to go here, at a minimum, when you go out to play your division, the juices just get going here. And you're talking about a division right now that's being led by the Falcons at 4-4. Nobody is running away with this thing. So maybe you steal a game or 2 there, and that costs you inside of the draft, where, again, they can afford to say, we want to go out and compete and try to win here because we have our drafted franchise quarterback. They still want to be up there high, trading out for a bunch of draft capital, but it's a little bit different. The Giants are one of those rare teams that's like, man, if we get to the bottom. And the Cardinals have a death grip on that number 1 pick overall. Then it becomes about what happens with Kyler Murray. He's not going to be an Arizona Cardinal. What are the Cardinals going to do? Because he's coming up to the point where he can actually get back out there on the field. How do you showcase that he might be healthy and capable of playing and winning some football games in the NFL for teams to be attracted to him, even though he has a massive contract and has the injuries, but not risk winning any games and taking yourself out of it? Yeah, sure. Yeah, well, a lot of people maybe wish that, but the only team that might be dumb enough to do it in recent history might be the Giants. So you have to take that with a grain of salt. I'll highlight Ramon here. I always thought Williams was gone after this season anyway. 100% agree with you there. So no surprise. Let's hope now Seattle loses the remaining games. Yeah, Seattle's not going to lose their remaining games, but even anything just falling short of winning the division is going to help improve this pick. Going out early in the playoffs will help improve this pick. So that's really, I think, the baseline that you're looking for there. The bottom line is New York Football Giants trade Leonard Williams to the Seattle Seahawks in exchange for a 2024 second round pick and a 2025 fifth round pick. The Giants convert the remaining salary of Leonard Williams and will go ahead and eat that money. That's how you get a little bit better draft capital from Seattle. And now the question will be, let's see what happens with this team moving forward. Why not wanting your team to go on a run and try to make the playoffs? If you're referring to the Giants, which I assume you are, because I can see, Ronnie, your lovely Giants t-shirt there, because there's nothing to be accomplished in that. This team is not good enough. It's just not. They're just not constructed to win football right now. And that's not just about whether or not Daniel Jones can be healthy. And then if he's healthy, whether or not he can have those big games. It's about, you still have a Jalen Hyatt who's looked good and better and expanding and played over 70% of the snaps the last couple of weeks. Have to see how many snaps he played in this last game. Obviously a very different game script with no QB on hand. These guys are learning and developing and growing. You don't have Evan Neal anymore, and it was questionable at best about what the quality of his play was going to be. You still don't have Andrew Thomas back on the field yet, and you have to make sure that he's 100% healthy. Yes, Tyree Phillips has been brought back, and he's played okay, and Glowinski has really rebounded after a terrible start to his season, and John Michael Schmitz is in the middle anchoring things. But this team hasn't proven that it can score points in the NFL this season. They're a 2-6 football team. And if you take away not only that game, take away just the second half against the Cardinals, they've scored 0, 12, 3, 16, 9, 14, and 10. These are not NFL scoring numbers. When you go over and look at the stats right now by team, remember, the Jets do not score a lot of points either. But the New York Football Giants, I believe, if we go ahead and look at their points per game, you're talking about a team that has averaged 11.9 points per game. The next closest team is the Raiders at 16. That's a touchdown. That's a touchdown better. The Pittsburgh Steelers also at 16 points per game. Excuse me. I want to make sure we get the average up here the correct way. 11.9 for the Giants. That's it. Patriots 14.5, 16 for the Raiders, 16-1 for Pittsburgh, Atlanta 17-3, along with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and then the New York Jets at 18. 18.1, the Carolina Panthers. So just think about the teams that you're playing around right now. You're playing around a bottom of the barrel Carolina Panthers team, a team with no offensive line and a backup quarterback in the Jets, a Buccaneers team that's well, but is not necessarily a team that has great QB play, though they have some skill position talent. Pittsburgh's offense has been a mess. The Atlanta Falcons had terrible QB play from Desmond Ridder, right? Like Patriots, Mac Jones, all of these teams. Would you, if you can objectively look at those teams and say, I wouldn't bank on them going anywhere in particular when it comes to trying to push for the playoffs and make a run? None of those teams are going to the playoffs. Maybe the Atlanta Falcons, someone has to win that division, so one of those teams is going to get there. But you're not going to have high hopes for those rosters. And by the way, talk about the teams that score a lot of points per game. The Miami Dolphins, yeah. The Dallas Cowboys, yep. The Philadelphia Eagles, the Buffalo Bills, the 49ers, even the Colts, a team that's battling here, doesn't have the defensive play. Baltimore Ravens, Detroit Lions, those are the teams that you're talking about winning divisions, going to the playoffs, making some noise there. So I mean that's all it comes down to. You have to be objectively distraught if the Giants were doing anything other than the decision that they made here. Now, the other thing that we can just wrap this little coverage on, where we remind you that the Giants have moved Leonard Williams to the Seattle Seahawks in exchange for a 2024 second and 2025 fifth round pick, also eating the bulk of that contract as well. You have to remember that the New York Football Giants, as we have we'll get a little bit extra news here as well in terms of maybe potentially what's going on. I'm trying to see what else we have here. Could be another move that came in the door. But you have to remember that the Giants are just not in a competitive spot right now. So they just need to be smart about what they're doing. It looks like we had this care of Andy Makowitz, who's not in on the stream, but still monitoring the wire here, are signing Stanley Thomas Oliver per league sources. So they're making an additional move here. Potentially. So we'll keep an eye on any other additional things that happen here. Nothing yet new in terms of what the Giants are going to do with Adoree Jackson, from what I can tell. And we'll just have to wait and see if anything else happens, and there definitely will. It's impossible to think this team isn't going to. Let's go ahead and take a look at D Nice 77. How many coaching staffs have to get fired to realize Jones is not the guy? Well, it's funny too. Somebody gave this good narrative, and I think it's a good point to bring up here, right? I mean, listen, you can look and say none of these other guys went on to head coaching jobs, settled back into coordinator positions. We talk about Joe Judge or Pat Shurmur, right? None of these guys went on to some type of success where you said, "Oh my goodness." But people have brought up, and we've kind of discussed this on the podcast as well. I don't know if Joe Schoen was fully pot committed on Daniel Jones, or at least saying, "Hey, we think that there's an opportunity here. We think we can develop him." And if you're Brian Daly, you're saying, all right, like I'll try to work with him and develop him. But because he can't be healthy and on the field, combined with bad offensive line play, it's not just him. I don't have the sample size. So at what point, if you're the Giants, just to your point, when you have a player like Daniel Jones, who, yes, is under contract, you can get out of after next season. Well, at what point do you look, and it's all things being considered. It's the state of where your organization is, the players and positions you still need to fill, and looking at the fact that Daniel Jones is 26, so he'll be 27 next year. Now, by NFL quarterback terms, he could play another decade. But we're now going to butt up against it here. And I know that when we're inside of these seasons, and if you're a Daniel Jones fan, and if you think that it's more than just his play, it's easy to point out all these little moments. But if you think about like average quarterbacks historically, when you talk about a guy being average, you don't say, well, and don't forget, in his third year, they had injuries on the offensive line. Now, in his seventh year, he suffered a setback. In his sixth year, you don't go through and document those. You take the totality of it. So Daniel Jones, in his fifth season now, has played, and we understand his rookie year came in late, 3 games in. He's played 13, 14, 11, 16, and now 5 games so far this year. So he has 59 games played. That's well under, the benchmark of how many you should play. He's completed 64% of his passes. He has improved that metric every single season, including this year. The average yards per pass, though, took a precipitous drop this season to 5.9 after mildly building 6.6 up to 6.8 year over year for the first 4 seasons. So the improved play was there, certainly. Last year, the 15 up, 5 down, touchdown interception, that was the glimmer to me, I think. That was, hey, we might have something here. The problem has been that this season, it's 2 up, it's 6 down, some fumble issues as well, holding onto the ball a little bit too long to go with all the other problems. And the biggest issue of all is the QBR. So while the rating had gone up every year, 52, then 84 in year number 3, 92 last season, 71 this year, not terrible, but the QBR of 39. And that's always what I come back to with these things. When you take in full situational football, Daniel Jones still struggled. Even with all the errors around him, it was still a concern. So at some point, it's twofold here, and I'll highlight Ronnie. Jones getting blamed for these last losses, and he's not even playing. Yeah, that's not what's happening here. But from a football and organizational perspective, the team is playing poorly. The offense cannot score points. Daniel Jones is injured. All the last 3 losses, or the losses recently, have not been his fault. All of those things are true. But also, time marches on. We have to still make a decision. We still have to go into next year's draft saying, is Daniel Jones the guy or not? Should we be drafting a quarterback if we're high in the draft or not? And there's going to be a lot of quarterbacks that are going to be available for them. The last note that I'll make here, we'll go over and take a look at draftbuzz.com, which I just happened to pull this up here. I happen to enjoy a couple of different websites that I just think do a nice job. So NFL Draft Buzz, I think they do a nice job organizing. I generally like the way that they grade out also their positions. Typically, I feel like they align pretty well. So as it stands right now, when you go in there, you're going to be talking about, at least in this moment, Caleb Williams is second overall by them, just on a pure talent standpoint and grade standpoint. I don't know why that actually would be the case. The grade overall, 95.5 for Caleb Williams. So he's the best overall. And if we went by rating here, it would certainly increase that. So you've got Caleb Williams. You've got Drake May. You've also got a little bit further down the list, Penix Jr. You've also got Sanders, who's listed 12th overall on their board. So within the top 12, and not all these guys are created equal, and Caleb Williams may be the clear cut. That's the guy you want to go for. That can be true. But going into the following year, there's going to be other quarterbacks that come out as well. So the one other thing that I'll mention here is when we come down to what the Giants are going to do, and if do they have to take a quarterback in the upcoming draft? They can take a quarterback. They probably will. They probably should. But they don't have to. They can survey the free agency landscape. They can survey the following year's draft class. Because when you don't have the high-end QB play, your team does not win football games. So you're always going to find yourself in a very positive spot in terms of drafting. The Giants had 2 top 10 picks this past year, or 2 years ago, right? So, they got an offensive lineman. They got an edge rusher. One of them's been injured and hasn't performed very well. One of them is coming on very strong in Kayvon Thibodeau, right? It's how you got Andrew Thomas. You had a first-round pick. It's how you got Dexter Lawrence, right? So they've had multiple first-round picks in multiple drafts recently, and we can make the very strong case that across a couple of different regimes that they've hit, right? That they've hit on a number of those successfully. Daniel Jones may ultimately be a miss. Evan Neal may ultimately be a miss. But they have found these pieces. Now, they should have hit on more of them. They should be more successful. But the bottom line is that's why they've been able to do some of these things. Let's take a look. I'm trying to get something new up here. We are still suffering from the Gettleman years. What's worse is we doubled down on dumb by re-signing DJ. Yeah, again, you can disagree with the signing. Again, because it's a 2-year out, I'm okay with it. I'll say this now, which I said then, and I don't think it really went over the way people would have perceived it to. I am not telling you what Gardner Minshew is or is not. But what I can say is that you wouldn't have gotten worse results than what you've seen this year from Daniel Jones or from Tyrod Taylor behind a bad offensive line. Gardner Minshew has thrown 7 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, 63% completion, 1,400 yards in relief of the injured Anthony Richardson. He's also been sacked 14 times. If we go inside of his game log, because I'm sure that that'll even give us a little bit more of an insight on a game-to-game basis how he's performed. Am I telling you that Gardner Minshew at 27 years old should have been starting for the New York Football Giants? Well, what I am telling you is it wouldn't cost anything. It wouldn't have cost you anything. And at a minimum, I had said they should have brought him in as a competition piece. Bring him into camp, let you have a nice comparison, right? Because what have Giants fans done all year? And I've done it too. It was compare the performances of Tyrod Taylor with that of Daniel Jones. Well, you might as well have brought in a guy who, by the way, for whatever he is or is not, this season for the Colts has QBRs of 72, 80, had a clunker of a game against Jacksonville with 26, 89, 58, 88. Almost every single one of those is better than any QBR the Giants have put out the entirety of this season and much of last season as well. So the cost would have been less, and it would have afforded you to continue to make open decisions. That's just a big part of this. The reality is this is where the team is. And all you can ask for is some proactive decision-making, right? And that's why you make the Leonard Williams move. And that's why hopefully you make additional moves in the coming hours. Because it is 4:00 on Monday, and you have 24 hours to button up the decisions and the moves that you want to make and find a way to set this team up to be successful going into the offseason, going into next year, and to the years beyond. That being the case, Leonard Williams for a 2nd and a 5th to the Seattle Seahawks, the first of what we think will at least be a couple of dominoes to fall before the deadline. We remind you, thank you first and foremost for coming in on the live stream. We really enjoy doing it and really enjoy everybody being in the chat, from frequent flyers like Tommy that we see all the time in the comments, OG Knockout in here, Ronnie, we saw you come up, Chris, we'll put you up here too as well, just because I want to make sure we just say it. Shout out to everybody. If the Giants pick top 5 in the draft, they will take a QB in my opinion. If they drop around 10, I don't believe they will. That's a real, and this is what I mean about How does the rest of the season unfold? Do the Giants accidentally walk themselves into a win or two that bumps them down? That's going to influence the decision making. And the other, again, I'll just reiterate, the other part of it is like, if a desperate enough team came knocking, say the Giants pick 5th. So you're not going to get Caleb Williams, but one of those other quarterbacks is right there and some team really wants him. What is the offer that someone calls for? Like years ago, when they wanted to call Dave Gettleman and he said, nope, don't take the calls. I'm going with Saquon Barkley, 2nd overall, gold jacket wearer, not looking back, right? Well, big pause, right? Big pause. And you say, what could you have gotten for that? And how could things have looked different? I've walked through that draft before. It's like, you could have gotten Nick Chubb in the 2nd round and been just as happy about things, right? So those are the decisions that you want the Giants to be more open for as this moves on here. And then I'll give this last one here to Tommy, frequent flyer. Dory Jackson is gone. That's why they put him on slot so he can get out of there. Leo has been wanting to go. Aziz might be next. Poor Barkley. We'll get the short end of the stick here. Yeah, I don't know Aziz with the injury. I don't know if he's going to end. That seems unlikely. And again, let's just be clear. The Adoree Jackson piece, at least early in the year. I mean, I said this too, by the way, so I don't think it's not an unfair statement. The Giants, you saw Trey Hawkins play well in camp and you want to put the best players on the field. And this is the way that you get there because out of anybody, Adoree Jackson is the guy that could play slot in theory. But I did say, okay, you can say, get the best guys on the field. But also, if Adoree Jackson was still playing at a high level, why would you care about a late round pick surging up the depth chart and saying, okay, great, you'll be a great depth piece as you learn. And Adoree Jackson's going to lock things down with Trey Banks across from him. They didn't do that, right? They started shuffling it. So I think it is an indication. And this is what happens with cornerbacks as they get over 30. They start to fall off a little bit and it becomes a problem. We all should, Alicia. Thank you for coming in. Bleed blue. We will wrap it up there. Reminding you guys, get over on the podcast feed. This will go back up over there as well following this episode. You can also go catch the previous episode, which talks just about some of the players that need to trade. Again, the debacle from the Jets game, if you want to look at that as well. Tomorrow, we'll come back in probably something around the deadline or a little bit ahead of it. If another player gets traded, we'll try to jump in as quick as we can to break it down with you guys as well. So be sure to turn on your alerts. Give us the follow over on Twitter at Adam Armbrecht, at One Giant Podcast. Give us a follow if you're on Twitter because that account that needs a little juice. We've got over 2,000 subscribers on YouTube. Not the same kind of traction over on Twitter. So go join us there. And you can also start to check out onegiantpodcast.substack.com because Andy's putting out his bets of the week over there. And we're going to do a little bit of content article writing as well. I see people mentioning about how bad the drafting has been in recent years. OG, right? They have to draft the quarterback in 2024. I'm glad to see that now. I'll highlight that, but I'll also highlight mentioning the bad drafting. Making some comparisons, right? What could have been for the Giants in previous years. So there'll be some good content going there as well. Until next time, guys, we really appreciate the support. We know that this Giants season is going in the wrong direction from a record standpoint, but the right direction in terms of starting to get in capital and preparing to build for the future. Until next time, if he was here, as Andrew Makowitz would want, need, and nay, demand the people know. As always, let's go Big Blue.